Welcome back, America. I'm Hugh Hewitt. Thank you for listening. My next guest is very special to me. I first met him in 1992 in the basement of Los Angeles' first AME church, then led by the legendary Chip Cecil Murray. And he is the most remarkable guy. Mark Whitlock was not only trained by Dr. Murray, but then became a pastor on his own at Core Church in Irvine, California, and now has been called by the authorities of his church, as I was called by the authorities of this network, to come to the Beltway. And he pastors Reid Temple A M E. Mark Whitlock, welcome back, Reverend Dr. Whitlock. It is great, as always, to talk to you.
It's always a friend. And you, Hugh, tell me everything is going well. I'm so excited to be back on your airways again.
Well, I call you when race is on the table, and I told my booking producer, let's get Dr. Whitlock. I always need to hear from you when race is on the table because I've heard you preach, and I need you to preach a little bit here. What is your perspective on the last 2 weeks, beginning with the murder of George Floyd through the violence? Tell me how Reid Temple's doing as well, because when you got drafted to come to D.C., I was shocked, and then I looked at Reid Temple's website, and I know why. I think it's the largest AME church in the country, isn't it?
It is. It's the largest AME church in the world with membership and size and certainly programming. I am excited about being at Reid Temple, but more than that, I'm also excited about the opportunity to bridge the gap racially, culturally, by way of religion and all. The challenges that I see, first off, thank you for inviting me on your show. You're still one of the largest radio hosts, talk show hosts in the country, and I'm always honored to be here. Although you're conservative, and I tend to be a little bit moderate to liberal, but I still feel that there's a need for us to cross countries and cross divides so that we can find some common ground. For me, the George Floyd killing, I'm interested that you said what you said, Howard. You said murder, and in many cases, moderates like myself see it as murder because the law was broken. The law, no matter if it's broken by a police officer or a person outside the law, was broken. Here we have a man, unlike Rodney King, who was beaten severely but lived. We have another guy, George Floyd, who is under arrest, and he is being kneeled on. He's being held by 3 to 4 police officers, and this man kneels on his neck. And so we deal with some systemic issues, yes, but we also deal with the breach of humanity where a man is struggling for his life. He's crying, he's hollering, and he's literally asking to live, and they don't let him live. And so for me, I do believe that's murder. And so out of that comes, in my opinion, something that's very complex. First, we have the traditional Eric Garner, Black Lives Matter. We have the traditional social justice protest. And we have people who are marching, people who are crying, people who are doing the same thing that Dr. Martin Luther King does. But then it takes on another light. It moves to this place where it becomes violent, it becomes a social economic issue, I think, born out of the pandemic where 30 million people are unemployed. We have more young white kids who are protesting than ever before in the history of this country. And I think social media has played a big part because if you remember the largest protest, and I'm going to let you come in with another question, but the largest protest was the Rodney King protest, the Rodney King unrest, the Rodney King riot. But we did not have social media at that time. We did not have Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Snapchat. We barely had cell phones, if you recall. Cell phones probably weighed about 30 pounds in those days. But now we have email, we have text messaging. So we have a method of organizing and gathering and bringing people together on both sides. So it's a different context. I am not going to go with the provocateurs from Russia. I'm not going to go there. And the other thing that I'm finding, Hugh, which is real different, is that they're protesting. If I were in California, they're protesting in Newport Beach. They're protesting in Huntington Beach. They're protesting in Beverly Hills. They're protesting in Larchmont. They're protesting in Washington, D.C., but they're not protesting in traditional African American communities. I was talking to some friends yesterday in South Central. They said, Reverend, ain't nothing happening in South Central. I was talking to people in Harlem. Reverend, ain't nothing happening in Harlem. And so my concern is it's a different movement than it was in 1992. On you, Hugh.
Now, Dr. Whitlock, I want to talk a little bit about the two kinds of violence. Violence happens incidentally in protests and almost accidentally, and then there's intentional, organized looting and the destruction. You and I both were in LA in 92, and you had to live it every day. I just covered it. I dropped in on my media helicopter and would film the destruction. Those neighborhoods, some of them never recovered. And while there have been these scenes on the Santa Monica 4th Street Promenade and in Newport Beach and in wealthy neighborhoods in Macy's in New York City, there's also H Street Northeast, which had a half dozen African American businesses burned out. There's also a story in the Wall Street Journal today about inner city Philadelphia. And my heart just breaks for these people. And you had to live and help them rebuild. I don't know that these violent people that burn stuff down get any idea. They're not helping anybody. It doesn't advance the cause of justice a lick.
Yeah, but it's an interesting narrative because in Watts in 1965, it was completely a black neighborhood, and I think you're absolutely right about that. Because if there's injustice anywhere, there's injustice everywhere, and Martin Luther King would say, if there's violence anywhere, there's violence everywhere. But in this case, they are burning and looting predominantly white neighborhoods or commercial neighborhoods that may spring back. Here's the point I'm trying to drive. In those poor neighborhoods, insurance is not as prevalent, is not as powerful, is not as much as in plays. But in some neighborhoods like those in Beverly Hills, Larchmont, Newport Beach, Huntington Beach, Santa Ana, trust me, not all the looters were the face of the protesters. We know from the 1992 unrest that business owners were burning their own businesses, and some major businesses were lighting fires to their buildings because the businesses weren't profitable. And those businesses were going down, and they benefited from the burning. Now, okay, some would say that's just a liberal take on it, and it's still wrong. I agree. I don't agree with looting. I don't agree with violence of any kind. You know I'm a social justice guy, so I don't agree with it. But in the same breath, we must not take away the reality that some people profit from the riot.
Agreed. Now, what I really want you to do, Mark Whitlock, is my audience is overwhelmingly white, not exclusively. It's also younger than most talk shows. It's very affluent. It's very highly educated. 70% of the people you're talking to on 300 plus affiliates across the country right now own their home. And that's why I like going to CORE. I used to hear stuff at your church that I didn't hear anywhere else. And so what are you going to preach on Sunday? And what do you want this audience to hear from you who have been doing the work of leading an AME congregation for as long as I've been on the radio, which is a long time?
By the way, in most black churches, the audience that is in the church tends not to be the low to moderate income community. It tends not to be the extreme liberal community. It tends to be homeowners. It tends to be educated. It tends to be those who tend to be a little bit more conservative than you see the people in the street. As a matter of fact, I am trying to bridge the gap between the black church, and Black Lives Matter, because Black Lives Matter has tended not to partner with the church because of our conservative ways. So here's the message. The message for me is not only must you say something, and I really have to deal with what took place out of the book of Acts, chapter 2, verses 1 through 21. Not only must we say something, but we must also do something. So, in other words, let's not just bicker with one another, but let's do what you saw me do in California. Let's sit down with the evangelicals. Let's sit down with our white brothers and sisters, and let's work out. First off, let's get a chance to come together in fellowship. And number two, let's make sure we understand one another, because there's nothing wrong with the inerrancy of the law, but we also must understand the responsibility of seeing the other side of the law. I was talking to the police chief here in Prince George's County, and he was absolutely outraged at the fact that two of his police officers beat up on some people. He said reform is not enough. We need to restructure this thing. We need to take a look at this thing and make it a better model as we move in the 21st century.
Do you despair of police reform? President Obama was on TV yesterday talking about the commission he put together in 2016. You remember how we went through a decade of police reform in L.A., 3 police chiefs, the commission that was headed up by Judge Webster, on and on it went. And do you believe in progress in police? I do. I just think that when an incident like the Floyd murder happens, the chief of police ought to be fired. I just think that accountability at every level depends upon the chief. What do you think, Mark Whitlock?
I think it's like taking a scab off of an infected sore. We know what's going to happen if you take the scab off. The pus will come out. But we also know that there's a ripping of the flesh and it's painful. I think reform tends to be the Vaseline that you put over an infected sore. It makes it nice and glossy. It sparkles, but it doesn't do anything. And so it is a result. We must begin not just to look at reform because we must progress. It is true that community policing has helped. Yes, it does. But we still have, and that was part of the reform process in Los Angeles. The real challenge, Hugh, and it sounds like I'm a little hyped, but I'm not, is that we still got some dinosaurs. We still have men on police forces who hold racial bias, who still look at black and get red, look at black and get angry, look at black and see them as a problem, not as a partner in the American way. Once we then rid ourselves of these dinosaurs who only know how to roar and tear things up and eat things up, will we find true reform? Until then, we'll still be putting Band-Aids over infected sores or Vaseline over infected sores.
Now, Dr. Whitlock, I personally believe you ought to be on every cable network talking about this because of your actual experience in ministering in the African American community and in a biracial, multiracial way. I want the last 3 minutes. You have now been here a year and a half, I think. You were in downtown Central City, LA. Then you were in Lily White, Orange County, and you built multiracial communities in both places. You've moved to the Beltway. How has your experience changed, and are you shocked by the insularity of this region?
Insularity is amazing. Why? And I've only been here 8 months, and 2 of those months have been sequestered in a home and doing worship service with an empty congregation of 12,000 people. A building that can hold 139,000 square feet of building with its own school with 300 students and 5 different corporations, and we're completing a $72 million housing operation. It's going to be exciting. We're going to open up in November. The Reid Temple for me is a wonderful opportunity for us to bridge the gap. Why? Because much like I was surprised with Minneapolis. I've been in Minneapolis. You've been there in Minnesota. Unemployment rate less than 3%. Yep. Poverty rate less than 20%. So you would not expect something like what took place in Minneapolis to take place. In fact, that's the closest thing to utopia that we have in one so crazy cold. So I love Minneapolis and the A.M.E. churches there. What I've learned is no matter where, and there is no problems here in Prince George's County because it's one of the richest counties black counties in the United States, yet there are health disparities, economic disparities, racial injustice. There's this challenge of the lack and the fear of crossing over and understanding what's in the minds of my white brothers and sisters. I'll continue to say this to you as I go off the air. Heaven is fully integrated. We will come together. I prefer us come together in the living plane on the earth versus meeting one another when we're in heaven.
Last question. When does Reid Temple get to reopen its doors, Reverend Dr. Mark Whitlock?
It's amazing. I think when God says so. African Americans, I really do when God says so. I do believe that African Americans are dying at a higher rate. So we must be concerned of dying at a higher rate from the pandemic.
Yes,
dying at
yes,
a higher
they are.
rate. Well, so as a result, we must not rush into the building. Church is not the building. Church is the heart. It is the mind. it is within. If we don't operate from that position, then we can go back in the buildings and die, but let's stay alive by worshiping one another. I love what this text says. We ought to love the Lord thy God with all our heart, our soul, and our mind, and we ought to love our neighbor as we love ourselves. It doesn't say anything about a building.
Mark, it is great to talk to you. Please give my regards to the Reverend Dr. Mia Whitlock as well. And I will see you in your church when we are all out of sequester and quarantine. Because although it's like 4 times as long as a Catholic Mass, you get the best preaching in America.
Not anymore. Not anymore. The service is now 45 minutes. Please ask your followers to follow me on Facebook and Reid Temple A M.E. and at Mark Whitlock Jr. It would be great. I love you, Hugh. Thank you for writing books about Cecil Murray and First A.M.E. Church. Look forward to joining you in the future.
I will see you soon. Thank you, Mark Whitlock.